Do we have a Cinzano of some sort, por favor?
Yes, sir. There is Cinzano Rosso, Dry, Bianco, and Rosé.
Oh, the complete set. I'll have a Cinzano Bianco. Shaken, not stirred. Gracias. Yes. Oh, how they still achieve that blend of herbs and wines, I'll never know.
Hello.
Melissa, darling, you're early. Would you like a Cinzano?
No, thank you. I've just had one.
You can drop our name on anyone. Cinzano Bianco.
Back in the days when the whole world was nuts, some came out of their shells to defend good taste. KP dry roasted peanuts. So it's chocks away. More wizard than a prang, far drier than a dip in the briny. More spiffing than tipping. A victory to savor. A taste of hope. KP dry roasted peanuts. Because the nut must go on.
Shall we go for the moule?
Yeah, we go for the
Moule?
Yes.
The Replay 2000 is more than just a stylish gift.
Actually, the avocado sounds rather nice. The avocado farcita.
You see, with the Replay 2000, you can rub out and start
I'm
again.
quite a fast eater.
And again.
Mozzarella.
Yeah, we'll plump for
And again. The Replay 2000 from Papermate. It's a perfect
I
gift.
say, might I change my mind?
Don't you know someone who could use one?
The Royal Exchange Shopping Centre. Entrances in Market Street and St Anne's Square. Stylish shopping in the heart of Manchester.
The celebration tonight turns to science fiction and an encounter with a madman.
The lighthouse in Ulverston, which it isn't really a lighthouse, it's a replica of the Eddystone Lighthouse, which was built as a memorial to one of Ulverston's famous sons. But I like to think that it could possibly be a spaceship, that there's something hiding in there, and if we ever get the 4-minute warning, that thing might suddenly blast off into space. And if it does, I hope I'll be on it. I don't know if it could get up that hill in 4 minutes, though.
Tonight's programme is about science fiction, described by award-winning writer Bob Shaw as a literature of ideas. We explore science fiction by commissioning Bob to write a story that we dramatise later in the programme. But first, a look at this fantasy world.
I discovered science fiction at the age of about 10, and quite literally it blew my mind. It was like getting a shot of LSD, except that, as far as I know, LSD wears off after a while, but the science fiction didn't. When I was supposed to be working up for university entrance, I was doing nothing of the sort. I was sitting at the back of the class, publishing my own carbon copy science fiction magazine. Quite literally, I sacrificed my education to it.
These highly acclaimed books are found all over Europe and the States. No matter how good, science fiction is considered a thing apart, an occupation for nutters.
Science fiction is the one branch of literature which is judged by its worst examples, and people are prejudiced against it. And the line of thinking is that if science fiction is bad, therefore if a story is good, it can't be science fiction. And people would come up to me and say, would you regard 1984 as science fiction? And I'd say, of course it is, what else can it be? And they say, but it's good, it's literature.
Bob Shaw worked in engineering and aircraft design. Many of his stories contain incredible scientific ideas made real and practical.
Striving for scientific accuracy can be a handicap sometimes. So I've noticed that there's nothing dates faster than a science fiction story which was scientifically correct at the time it was written, and the author was perhaps very proud of the fact that it was right, but next year somebody discovers something else that proves it was all wrong. One morning, Flash Gordon and his girlfriend Dale and another chap were flying along the spaceship, and it got hit by a ray, and they had to bail out. And they opened the door and they're getting ready to jump out, and Flash Gordon said, check your anti-gravity belts. And he looked down, everybody's wearing nice little silver belts, which, for all we know, could be what anti-gravity belts will look like if they're ever invented. And then he shouted, "Make sure you've got your ray guns," and they all looked, and they were carrying nice little guns, which again could be what a ray gun will look like. Then just as they're on the point of jumping, he said to Dale, "Don't forget the portable radio." Now this is where the whole thing went wrong, because the person who'd been designing those props, up until then he'd been using his imagination and doing pretty well. But remember, these films were made in the 30s. He knew that a radio was about a thing about the size of a writing desk. And try as he might, he could not visualize it ever being shrunk to more than about half its size. So Dale disappeared and came back carrying the portable radio, which is a thing about the size of a tea chest, and jumped out with it. Well, that's an example of somebody trying to be scientifically accurate and just making a complete mess of the whole thing.
This man put science fiction into pictures. In his Preston hideout, Brainstorm Studios, Bryan Talbot works on illustrations for Bob's story Encounter with the Madman. Comics have always been part of the science fiction tradition, but the Batman and Superman comics give a limited idea of their scope. There is a wealth of adult comics with more sophisticated storylines. In these, the serious science fiction illustrator has a vehicle for his pictorial fantasies. Brainstorm Studios grew out of these psychedelic comics, typical of the early 70s, science fiction linked to the underground world of hallucination and fantasy. Frank Fazacoli is a comic strip set in the Wigan of the future and controlled by robots. It's a takeoff of Flash Gordon, Dan Dare, and Star Trek. So Bryan used a drawing style familiar to us from American sci-fi comics to portray his northern anti-heroes.
A science fiction story does not have to have a lot of hardware like spacecraft and robots and ray guns. It's often been described as a literature of ideas. So there's no reason at all why you shouldn't set a science fiction story, and a good one, in the present day or even in the past.
Many science fiction illustrators have moved into the full-length comic novel. The Adventures of Luther Arkwright is an adult novel dealing with the science fiction ideas of parallel worlds, alternative futures, and time travel.
One of the drawbacks of science fiction today is that it's prejudged by people who don't know anything about it. People glimpse television series of science fiction, or they see movies. Perhaps they've had to take their kiddies along to see it, and they run away with the idea that that's all there is to science fiction. But in fact, there is a thoughtful adult variety of science fiction which is worth any intelligent person's time to read. Yeah, Dalton struck me as being a particularly good subject for a science fiction story because...
We brought Bob and Bryan together to combine their knowledge of science fiction with their talents as writer and illustrator to create Encounter with the Madman. The story incorporates time travel, one of science fiction's basic ingredients. Through an encounter between past and future, science fiction can explore the consequences of our actions.
Well, I see the important thing about Encounter with the Madman being sort of one of the functions of science fiction is to actually warn people of what could happen if we don't look out. And so I want to have quite a few scenes of sort of mass destruction and sort of aftermath of any sort of nuclear disaster. It's a warning, really. You know, a warning, this is the way things will turn out unless we're very careful.
We filmed Encounter with the Madman in and around Manchester. It is set in 1808 and features John Dalton, the man who first discovered the atom. Stuart Richmond plays Dalton.
John Dalton was a natural scientist, philosopher, as they used to call them, who lived at the turn of the 17th, 18th century. He died in 1844. He was responsible for the creation of atomic weights.
100 years after Dalton, Rutherford split the atom, creating nuclear fission. This revolutionized atomic physics and led to the making of the atom bomb, an appalling consequence of Dalton's initial discovery. Were I to publish the recent events that my senses have encountered, I should not only be considered mad, which might almost be for the better, but I should certainly encourage the reproach of my philosopher colleagues. It is thus that I write this account for posterity. I have permission to walk in a deer park, which is less than 2 miles from New College. And as the public at large is fortunately not permitted access to the ground, I was looking forward to a spell of reflective solitude. Publication of my new system of chemical philosophy had scarcely begun, and yet already I could envisage the need for a second volume. And I wanted an interlude in which to consider its general structure. The first intimation that my plans were to go completely awry came when I encountered Piggott, the gamekeeper. I fail to understand how he remains in such employment. He's little to say for himself, and even less trace of civility about him. I was even more affronted to observe that he was armed with a gun, with which no doubt he intended to slaughter one or more dumb animals, as much for his own amusement as for anything else. I have never before known a person receive so much pleasure from the infliction of pain on other creatures.
Plenty more. Grows on trees round here.
Have you, my good man, ever paused to consider the fact that a hare is God's handiwork? Even the grass you so carelessly trample is part of the miracle of creation, and beyond your ability to repair.
And why should I want to repair grass, Mr. Dalton? Sir. Best be setting me traps then, hadn't I?
It was a high-pitched ululation, unlike anything in my previous experience, which gradually sank into a final moan which had an oddly mechanical quality to it.
Bugger me.
I confess the sound had a chilling effect on my blood, and it was with some apprehension that a moment later I observed something moving in the trees.
Poacher.
No! Let us see.
I am unable to perceive many colors, and therefore matters of style and fashion mean little to me. But the stranger's clothing was noticeably odd. Even more striking, however, was his manner. I'm almost certain that he failed to notice either myself or Piggott close at hand.